Imagine discovering that the person you love, the one you built your entire life with, is hiding a secret so deep it threatens to destroy everything. One simple buzz of a phone, one unexpected message, and your reality begins to unravel. But this isn't a story about defeat. It's a story about betrayal, revenge, and resilience. You'll feel the sting of doubt, the weight of discovery, and the cold resolve of a decision that changes everything. Every choice, every word, every silence serves a greater purpose. How far would you go to take back control of your life? Get ready for a journey of tension, twists, and, in the end, one lingering question: what would you do? She didn't go to the studio. Instead, she drove to a quiet corner of the city, parking outside a cafe where a man, Ard, was waiting. I never paid much attention to her phone. It was always there, buzzing with the usual notifications, emails, family group chats, those never-ending app alerts. But that evening, as I stood at the counter slicing vegetables for our dinner, her phone buzzed, and something was different. The name on the screen caught my eye. R. It wasn't a family member. It wasn't a colleague I recognized. Just R. And the message preview? Short. Too short. Can't wait to see you again. My hands froze mid-slice, the knife resting against the onion. The pungent smell stung my eyes, but I couldn't blame it entirely on the vegetable. "Can you hand me the salt?" she asked from across the room, her voice light, as if nothing in the world was amiss. I glanced at her. She was busy stirring the sauce, humming softly to herself. It was a moment so mundane, so ordinary, that it felt surreal. Could this woman, the one I'd shared my life with for years, be hiding something like this? I picked up the salt shaker, my fingers brushing her phone on the counter. The buzz had stopped, the screen gone dark. For a brief moment, I considered unlocking it. Just a quick look, nothing invasive, I told myself. But my hands moved slower than my mind, and by the time I decided, she had turned back to me, her eyes meeting mine. "Thanks," she said, reaching for the salt. She didn't notice where my gaze had lingered or how my jaw tightened. Or maybe she did and chose to ignore it. That's the thing about trust. It makes you blind to the obvious until something forces your eyes open. I went back to slicing, my rhythm broken. Each chop felt heavier, louder. The sound echoed in the kitchen, filling the silence between us. My thoughts raced faster than I could process. Was it innocent? A wrong number, perhaps? But deep down I knew better. You don't sign a text R if you're a stranger or a wrong number. It was deliberate, personal, intimate. The dinner went on as usual, or at least it seemed that way to her. We talked about our day, the new neighbor who'd moved in down the street, and a family event coming up next month. But the conversation felt hollow to me, her words bouncing off walls I'd never noticed before. Later that night, after she'd fallen asleep, I sat in the darkened living room. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. Her phone was on the nightstand, charging, just out of reach. I stared at the wall, the image of that name, that message, flashing in my mind like a neon sign. I had no proof of anything yet, no context, no explanation. But that single text had pierced through the fabric of my normal life, unraveling it thread by thread. Trust, once so solid, had become brittle in an instant. And that's when I decided I wouldn't accuse her, not yet. Instead, I would wait, watch, gather. If there was more to R than a single text, I would find out. The pieces of a puzzle were scattered in front of me, and I intended to put them together. Quietly, patiently, one careful move at a time. For now, though, I'd wait for her phone to buzz again. The days that followed felt like living in a haze. Something had shifted, but it wasn't visible, not to her. To me, though, it was glaringly obvious. I had become hyper-aware of everything she did. Every glance at her phone, every moment she spent scrolling or typing, every sigh she let out while staring at the screen. It all felt like a clue. I didn't want to believe it at first. After all, You don't spend years building a life with someone only to have it crumble over a single text message. There had to be an explanation, something innocent, something that would make me laugh at myself for even entertaining the idea. But then came the little things. It started when she claimed she had to stay late at work, a fairly common occurrence in her line of work. But this time, her explanation felt rehearsed. Her voice lacked the usual conviction. She'd said, "I've got a big meeting to prepare for." But when I asked a casual follow-up, "What's the meeting about?" there was a pause, just long enough to plant a seed of doubt. "Oh, just strategy planning," she'd replied with a dismissive wave, her eyes flicking back to her phone. Normally, that might have been enough for me. Not anymore. Now, I heard hesitation in every word and saw shadows in every glance. One evening, she came home smelling of a faint cologne that wasn't mine. It was subtle, just a trace, but it clung to her like a whisper I couldn't ignore. I didn't say anything. Instead, I hugged her, holding her just a little longer than usual, my nose brushing her hair as I breathed in the scent. She didn't pull away, didn't flinch, but my heart did. "Long day?" I asked, my tone neutral, almost conversational. She nodded. "Exhausting?" I nodded too, pretending to accept her answer. Inside, though, my mind was already racing. Exhausting indeed. From that moment on, I started keeping mental notes. I noticed how she'd set her phone down face down more often, how her laughter seemed different, louder, freer, when she was texting. I started timing how long she spent in the shower or out for errands, wondering if these moments were escapes or coincidences. Even her wardrobe choices shifted subtly. Dresses that hadn't seen the light of day in months suddenly reappeared. Then there was the way she'd sometimes smile at her phone, a small, secretive smile that she used to save for moments between us. That was the hardest part. It wasn't the suspicion that hurt. It was the slow realization that she was sharing pieces of herself with someone else. Pieces that used to be mine, but I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I played the role of the attentive husband, nodding at her stories about her day, helping her with the dishes, and joining her for our evening TV routine. All the while, my mind was a battlefield, torn between wanting to catch her in the act and praying that I'd never have to. One night, as we lay in bed, her phone buzzed. She reached for it quickly, trying to be subtle. I pretended not to notice, keeping my eyes on the ceiling as my heart pounded in my chest. When she turned her back to me, screen glowing faintly against the dark, I knew. She thought she was careful, thought I wasn't paying attention, but I was, more than ever. Every movement she made was another piece of the puzzle, another thread in the web I was weaving. And the more I observed, the more certain I became that this wasn't paranoia. This was real. And soon, I'd have enough to prove it. I had hoped I was wrong. Truly I did. But hope has a way of turning into desperation when the pieces begin to align. That night, when she left her phone on the counter and stepped away to answer a call in the other room, I knew this was my chance. Her phone lay there, innocuous as ever, the screen dark, the edges sleek. I could hear her voice drifting in from the living room, soft and pleasant, entirely unaware of the storm brewing in my chest. My hand hovered above the phone for what felt like an eternity. I wasn't the type of man to invade someone's privacy, not hers, not anyone's. But this wasn't about privacy anymore. This was about truth. When I picked it up, the screen lit up automatically. And there it was, a notification from R. My stomach dropped. My hands trembled slightly as I swiped, my thumb hesitating only briefly before opening the messages. And there it was, proof. Not just a message or two, but an entire thread stretching back weeks, maybe months. Words that once belonged to me, whispered in the quiet moments of our relationship, now handed over to someone else. I miss you already. Last night was amazing. I wish I could see you right now. I read them all, my heart pounding louder with every word. My breathing grew shallow as I scrolled further, each message a dagger. There were photos too. Nothing explicit, but enough to confirm what I already knew. This wasn't just a flirtation. This was a full-blown affair. A noise from the living room snapped me out of my trance. I locked the phone and set it down exactly where it had been, before she could suspect anything. My hands were shaking, my mouth dry. I walked to the sink, turned on the tap, and splashed cold water on my face. The sound of her laughter on the phone, light and carefree, carried through the air like an insult. When she returned, her eyes met mine briefly. "Everything okay?" she asked, a faint smile on her lips. "Yeah," I replied, forcing my voice to steady. "Just tired." I wasn't tired. I was enraged, and devastated, and completely, utterly lost. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her phone buzzing occasionally on the nightstand. Each vibration felt like an earthquake, shaking the foundation of everything I thought I knew. My mind raced with questions. Who was R? How long had this been going on? How could she look me in the eyes and lie so easily? But there was one thought that consumed me above all others. What was I going to do now? Confronting her felt premature. I needed more. I needed every detail, every ounce of proof. The messages were enough to confirm my worst fears, but they weren't enough for what I was planning. Because now it wasn't just about her betrayal. It was about what came next. And if she thought she could play me for a fool, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. The man she married wasn't someone to be underestimated. I wasn't just going to uncover the truth. I was going to make sure she faced it in a way she'd never forget. Knowing the truth is one thing. Living with it day after day is another. Every moment in her presence felt like a test of my willpower. I had to act as if nothing had changed, as if I were the same husband who hadn't read her messages, seen the photos, or pieced together the lies. But I wasn't that man anymore. The morning after my discovery, I watched her move through the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. She was radiant as always, her every move practiced and graceful. How many times had I admired her like this, thinking I was the luckiest man alive? Now, all I saw were the shadows of her deception. "Coffee?" she asked, holding up the pot. I nodded, careful to keep my voice steady. "Thanks." She poured me a cup, her eyes meeting mine briefly, searching for something. Was it guilt? Suspicion? Or was she so confident in her web of lies that she didn't even consider the possibility that I knew? I took the cup from her, forcing a small smile. She smiled back, but it didn't reach her eyes. From that moment on, my focus shifted. I wasn't just her husband anymore. I was her shadow, silently tracking her every move. I started with small things, noting her schedule, timing her comings and goings. When she left for her yoga class one evening, I followed her, keeping my car far enough behind to avoid suspicion. She didn't go to the studio. Instead, she drove to a quiet corner of the city, parking outside a cafe where a man, R, was waiting. I stayed in the car, watching them through the window. He was younger than me, maybe by a decade. Clean-cut, confident, the kind of man who probably turned heads without trying. They talked, laughed, leaned in close. She reached across the table to touch his hand, and he didn't pull away. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The rage was there, simmering beneath the surface, but I pushed it down. I couldn't afford to act on impulse. This wasn't just about catching her in the act. It was about building a case, one she couldn't deny or twist. I took photos, careful to keep the flash off. Each click of the camera felt like another nail in the coffin of our marriage. Back home, she was her usual self, chatting about mundane things, grocery lists, a coworker's drama, plans for the weekend. I nodded along, offering the occasional or yeah, all while cataloging every word, every gesture. Did she really think I couldn't see through her? One night I tested her. "How was yoga?" I asked casually, sipping a beer as we sat on the couch. She hesitated, just for a second, before launching into a rehearsed story about the class. The instructor tried a new routine. It was intense but good, she said, smiling. I nodded, pretending to be impressed. Inside, I was cataloging her lie, adding it to the growing list. In bed, as she lay beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts. I could feel her breathing, slow and even, as if she had no cares in the world. It was infuriating. Part of me wanted to wake her up and confront her right then and there, to see her face when she realized the game was up. But I resisted. No, this wasn't the time. The confrontation would come, but it wouldn't be in a heated moment of rage. It would be planned, deliberate, and final. She had built a facade, a life where she thought she could have it all. My job was to dismantle it, piece by piece, until she had no choice but to face the truth. For now, I remained silent, watching, waiting, planning. The end was coming, and she didn't even know it. Late at night, when the house was silent and the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator, I found myself staring at an old photo album on the shelf. It had been years since I'd opened it, but tonight something drew me to it, as if it held answers I desperately needed. I pulled it down, its edges worn from time and handling. Sitting at the dining table, I flipped through the pages slowly, the smell of old paper filling the air. There we were, years younger, brighter, untouched by the weight of what I now carried. Photos from our wedding day, our honeymoon, and those lazy Sundays when we had nothing to do but enjoy each other's company. In one picture, she was laughing, her head thrown back, her hair catching the sunlight. I'd taken that photo during a weekend trip to the lake. She hadn't known I was watching her then, just like she didn't know now. The difference was, back then, her joy had been mine. Now it belonged to someone else. I closed the album, leaning back in the chair, the weight of it pressing against my chest. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt something other than anger. There was a deep, aching sadness, a mourning for the life we had built, for the woman I thought she was, and for the man I had been when I believed in us. I thought about all the small moments that had defined our relationship. The way she used to wait up for me when I worked late, her head nodding off to sleep on the couch, but refusing to go to bed without me. The way she used to hold my hand in public as if to say, "This is my person." The way we'd shared inside jokes that no one else could understand. Was it all a lie? Had she been pretending all this time, or had something changed along the way? Maybe I had changed. I thought about the years, the routines, the times I'd taken her for granted without realizing it. For a fleeting moment, I questioned everything. Maybe there was a way back. Maybe this affair was a symptom of something broken, something we could fix, if we just tried. After all, I'd loved her once, and I believed she had loved me. But then, her phone buzzed from the nightstand. That familiar vibration pulled me back into the present like a slap to the face. I didn't have to look at it to know who it was. I clenched my fists, staring at the glowing screen as if it were mocking me. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a single bad decision. It was a choice she made every day. To lie, to cheat, to betray the vows we had taken. The sadness faded, replaced by a cold, burning resolve. Whatever love we had shared, whatever memories we had built, she had buried them the moment she let another man into her life. There was no going back from this. The life I was mourning wasn't just gone, it had been stolen from me. I stood up, leaving the album on the table. Tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow, I would take the next step. Whatever doubts I had, whatever weakness had crept in tonight, they would not stop me. This wasn't about saving a broken marriage anymore. This was about reclaiming my dignity, my life, and my sense of self. I turned off the light and went to bed. She was already asleep, her breathing steady, her body turned away from me. I lay down beside her, staring at the ceiling, the cold emptiness between us more palpable than ever. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I was a man betrayed, a man with a plan, and a man who had no intention of letting her get away with this. Tomorrow, everything would change. The decision was made. No more hesitation, no more questioning. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and now it was my turn to act. I didn't want a confrontation filled with yelling or accusations that could be denied or twisted. No, this would be quiet, deliberate, and undeniable. If she thought she could hide in the shadows of her deceit, I'd make sure she was exposed under the brightest light. I started with her phone. Late at night, while she slept soundly beside me, I accessed it again. This time I didn't just skim through the messages, I downloaded them. Screenshots of every text, every photo, every piece of evidence. It was all transferred to my laptop and stored in a folder I named Simply Truth. I wasn't taking any chances. Next, I traced her patterns. Every excuse she gave, every errand, every work meeting. I followed her once more, but this time, I didn't stop at just observing. I tracked their meeting place, their time together, and even managed to catch a photo of them walking out of a hotel together. The way she clung to his arm, her head resting on his shoulder, it was enough to make my stomach turn, but I didn't flinch. Not anymore. The hardest part was keeping up appearances at home. I smiled when she talked about her day, nodded at her small anecdotes, and even played along when she suggested we host a dinner for our friends. Every interaction felt like a performance, but I was good at it, better than I ever thought I could be. She didn't suspect a thing. The dinner invitation was exactly what I needed. It was her idea, and that made it perfect. A gathering of people we both knew, a friendly setting, a night she thought would pass uneventfully. What better stage for the truth to come out? I began planning every detail. I contacted a lawyer first, ensuring I had everything in place for what would come after. Financials were sorted, assets protected. This wasn't just about exposing her. I needed to protect myself from the fallout. Then came the technical part. I arranged for the messages and photos I'd collected to be displayed during the dinner. It was easier than I expected. A simple connection from my laptop to the television was all it took. The idea of her seeing her private betrayal displayed in front of our closest friends filled me with a grim satisfaction. The night before the dinner, she was in an unusually good mood. She flitted around the house, setting the table, checking the menu, humming a tune under her breath. Watching her like that, I felt a pang of something, regret maybe? Or was it just the last remnants of the love I once felt for her, fading away? Excited for tomorrow? She asked, looking at me with a smile that was almost convincing. Of course, I replied smoothly, raising my glass to hers. It'll be a night to remember. She laughed, oblivious to the double meaning. It struck me then how easy this had all been for her. The lies, the deception, the facade of a happy wife. But that would end soon enough. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of doubt, but because of anticipation. I rehearsed the sequence of events in my mind, visualizing every moment. The guests arriving, the casual chatter, the laughter around the table. And then, the moment when I'd take control. The television would light up with her secrets, and there would be no escape, no excuse she could give that would undo the damage. As the first rays of morning light seeped through the curtains, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her sleeping face. She looked peaceful, innocent even. For a brief second, I wondered if I could go through with it. But then I remembered the messages, the photos, the lies. She had made her choices. Now it was time for me to make mine. By the end of the next night, she wouldn't just know I had uncovered the truth. She'd know I had been waiting, watching, and planning. And most of all, she'd know that I wasn't the kind of man you could betray without consequences. Tomorrow, the stage would be set, and she wouldn't even see it coming. The night of the dinner arrived, and the house was alive with laughter and conversation. She had outdone herself, setting the table with her best china and preparing an elaborate meal. She floated around the room, smiling and chatting, the perfect hostess. Watching her, I couldn't help but admire how effortlessly she wore her mask. But tonight, that mask would crack. The guests were a mix of close friends and family, people who had known us for years, who believed in the picture-perfect marriage we had presented to the world. They laughed at old jokes, shared stories, and praised her cooking. I played along, nodding at the right moments, keeping my tone light and casual. But inside, my heart was a thunderstorm. As we finished the main course, I stood, glass in hand, and tapped it lightly with a fork. The room quieted, and all eyes turned to me. "I'd like to say a few words," I began, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil beneath. "First, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. It means a lot to both of us to have you here." She smiled at me from across the table, her eyes warm. For a fleeting moment, I almost faltered. But then I remembered the messages, the photos, the lies. I turned to the guests and continued. "Marriage, as you all know, is built on trust, on love, on loyalty. It's a partnership where two people commit to facing life together, no matter what." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle in the room. "But sometimes, that trust is broken." Her smile faded, replaced by a flicker of confusion. She tilted her head, her brow furrowing slightly. "I've recently learned something," I said, my voice growing firmer. "Something that shattered the foundation I thought we'd built. And I think it's only fair to share it." Before she could speak, I pressed a button on my phone. The television behind me lit up, and there they were. The messages, the photos, the undeniable proof of her betrayal. Gasps echoed around the room as her infidelity played out in stark detail. She froze, her face draining of color as she stared at the screen. What is this?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "This," I said, turning to face her, "is the truth. The truth you've been hiding. The truth I've been living with in silence, watching, waiting." The room was silent, save for the soft hum of the television. Every pair of eyes was on her, their expressions a mix of shock, pity, and disgust. She looked around, her lips trembling, as if searching for an escape. But there was none. "You lied to me," I continued, my voice steady. "You lied to all of us. And tonight, those lies end." Tears welled in her eyes as she reached for me. "Please let me explain." "Explain what?" I interrupted, my tone cold. "That you've been seeing another man? That you've been living a double life, while pretending everything was fine? There's nothing you can say that I haven't already seen." The guests exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to do. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others stared at her, waiting for a response. She looked around the room, pleading silently for someone to come to her defense, but no one did. "I didn't want to do this," I said, my voice softening just enough to sound genuine. "But you left me no choice. The trust we built is gone. The life we shared is over." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking as the weight of her actions finally hit her. The room remained silent, the tension thick enough to choke on. I turned to the guests, my tone shifting to one of finality. "I'm sorry you had to see this, but I thought you all deserved to know the truth. Now, if you'll excuse me, I think it's time to end this evening." Without waiting for a response, I walked out of the room, leaving her and our shattered marriage behind. The voices of the guests rose behind me, whispers turning into murmurs as they tried to process what they had just witnessed. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't carrying the weight of her lies. The truth was out, and now, the consequences were hers to face. I got into my car and drove, leaving the house, the dinner, and the wreckage of my old life in the rearview mirror. I didn't go far that night. I drove aimlessly through the quiet streets, the weight of everything pressing down on me. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the house was dark. The guests were gone, the party dismantled, and I could feel the silence even before I stepped inside. She was waiting for me in the living room, sitting on the edge of the couch, her eyes red and swollen. A glass of wine sat untouched on the coffee table, the reflection of the dim light shimmering in the liquid. As I closed the door behind me, she stood, her movements hesitant, almost fragile. "Please," she began, her voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. "We need to talk." I crossed the room slowly, my steps deliberate. She watched me, searching for some hint of softness in my expression, but I gave her nothing. When I finally spoke, my voice was cold, measured. "Talk, then?" She hesitated, her hands wringing nervously. I don't even know where to start. How about with the truth?" I snapped, the anger bubbling to the surface despite my effort to control it. "That seems like a good place to begin." Her lower lip quivered, but she nodded. "I never meant for it to go this far," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "It started as nothing, just texts, a distraction. I didn't think it would." "Spare me the excuses," I interrupted. "You don't accidentally end up in a hotel with another man." Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, she looked utterly defeated. "You're right," she admitted, her voice breaking. "It wasn't an accident. But it wasn't because of you either. It wasn't because I don't love you." I let out a bitter laugh, the sound harsh in the quiet room. "Don't love me? That's a good one. You've got a strange way of showing love. Sneaking around, lying, betraying me." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she shook her head. "I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was trying to feel something again. I felt so lost, so disconnected. And he made me feel alive." I stared at her, my jaw tightening. "And I didn't? The life we built, the years we spent together, that wasn't enough for you?" "It's not that simple," she said, desperation creeping into her voice. "I was drowning and I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to fix it." I stepped closer, the distance between us now just a few feet. "So instead of talking to me, instead of working on what we had, you chose this? You chose to destroy everything." "I know I was wrong," she sobbed, her hands reaching for me. But I stepped back, refusing to let her touch me. "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But I never stopped loving you. Please, you have to believe that." "Believe you?" I said, my voice hard. "Why would I believe anything you say now? You've lied to my face for months. You let me think we were fine while you were running off with him." Her knees buckled, and she sank back onto the couch, her hands covering her face. "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered. "I don't even know where to start." For a long moment, I stood there, watching her crumble. This was the moment I had anticipated, the moment I thought would bring me satisfaction. But instead, I felt empty. The rage had burned itself out, leaving only a cold hollowness behind. "You can't fix it," I said finally, my voice devoid of emotion. "What's broken here can't be repaired. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed us. You betrayed everything we were." She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "Can we try? Can't we find a way to move past this?" I shook my head slowly. "You moved past us the moment you let him into your life. And I'm done being the man who pretends not to notice." The silence that followed was deafening. She sat there, her tears falling freely, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to comfort her. This was her burden to carry, her mess to clean up. Without another word, I turned and walked upstairs. The sound of her sobs echoed faintly as I closed the door to our bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, my mind strangely calm. This was the end. Not of my pain, perhaps, but of my patience. She could say whatever she wanted, beg, plead, cry. It didn't matter. The bridge between us was already ashes. The morning after our confrontation, I woke early, the weight of the previous night heavy in the air. The house was quiet. She had likely stayed on the couch, avoiding the room we once shared. I didn't care. I had slept better than I had in weeks, knowing the worst was behind me. I went about my morning ritual calmly, brewing coffee and flipping through the newspaper. It felt almost surreal, this return to routine, but there was something different now, a sense of clarity. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was in control. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, disheveled, her eyes swollen from crying. She hesitated before stepping inside, as if unsure whether she was allowed in her own home. "Morning," she said softly, her voice tentative. I didn't look up. "Morning." She lingered, watching me. "We should talk." "About what?" I asked, finally meeting her gaze. "You've said all there is to say, and I've made my decision." Her lips parted, as if to argue, but then she hesitated. "What decision?" I folded the newspaper neatly and set it aside. "To end this. To end us." Her face crumbled. "Please, don't say that. We can work through this. I'll do anything, counseling, therapy, whatever it takes." I shook my head, my tone firm. "This isn't something we can fix. You didn't just break my trust, you destroyed it. And trust doesn't come back with an apology or a few therapy sessions." "But," she began, stepping closer, her hands trembling. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," I interrupted, my voice cutting through her protest. "The divorce papers will be ready by the end of the week. I've also taken steps to protect my assets. The house, the accounts, they're all secured. You'll get your fair share, but nothing more." Her mouth opened and closed, as if struggling to form words. You've already done all that?" "Yes," I said, standing and moving to the sink. "While you were busy lying, I was planning. You might think I'm just reacting now, but I've been preparing for this for weeks." She stared at me, a mix of shock and hurt in her eyes. "You planned this?" "All of it." I turned to face her, my expression cold. "What did you think would happen? That I'd yell and scream, throw you out and crumble into a heap? No. I'm not that man. I don't make rash decisions, and I don't leave my life to chance. While you were sneaking around, I was making sure I wouldn't be left with nothing." Her hands gripped the edge of the counter for support. "You don't understand. I wasn't trying to take anything from you." "Then what were you doing?" I asked, my voice rising slightly. "Because from where I'm standing, you didn't just take my trust, you took my peace, my dignity, my life. And you gave it to him." Her tears started again, but they didn't move me this time. "I was lost," she whispered. "I didn't know how to fix myself." "Then you should have come to me," I said. "But you didn't. You went to him. And now you live with that choice." For a moment, she simply stood there, her breath hitching, her tears falling silently. Then, she straightened, a hint of defiance in her posture. "So that's it? You're just going to walk away?" "No," I replied, my tone quiet but firm. "I'm going to rebuild. Without you." I walked past her, grabbing my keys and heading toward the door. As I reached for the handle, she called after me, her voice breaking. "What are you going to do now?" I paused, turning my head slightly. What I should have done the moment I saw that message. Move on. With that, I stepped outside, leaving her standing in the kitchen, alone with her choices. I didn't know what the future held for me, but one thing was certain: it wouldn't include her. This wasn't just an ending, it was a beginning. And this time I was writing the script. The bar was quiet, the kind of place where you could sit unnoticed for hours. A faint hum of conversation and the occasional clink of glasses filled the air, but none of it reached me. I sat alone at a corner table, nursing a whiskey. The amber liquid swirled in the glass as I turned it slowly, watching the light catch on its surface. It had been 2 days since I walked out of that house. 2 days since I'd left her standing in the kitchen, her face a mask of regret and disbelief. I hadn't gone back. I wasn't sure if I ever would. For now I was staying at a small motel on the edge of town. It wasn't much: a bed, a desk, and a view of a parking lot, but it was quiet, and quiet was what I needed. I took a sip of the whiskey, the burn spreading through my chest. The weight I'd been carrying for weeks was gone, replaced by something I couldn't quite name. Not relief, not satisfaction, something colder, emptier. The bartender passed by, giving me a nod. "Another round?" I shook my head. "Not yet." He moved on, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I stared at the glass, the events of the past weeks playing in my mind like a film on repeat. The text, the lies, the dinner, her tears, every moment etched into my memory. I wasn't angry anymore. That fire had burned itself out. What remained was something quieter, but no less consuming: resolve. I'd done what I needed to do, said what needed to be said. Now, the path ahead was mine to decide. The door to the bar opened, and a gust of cold air swept in. I glanced up, my eyes catching on a woman who had just walked in. She was about my age, maybe a little younger, with dark hair pulled back and a confident stride that suggested she belonged here. She scanned the room briefly before settling at the bar, a few seats away from me. I turned back to my drink, but her presence lingered at the edge of my awareness. It wasn't that I was looking for anything, not tonight, not in this moment, but there was something about her, something I couldn't quite place. The bartender approached her, and I caught fragments of their exchange. She ordered a glass of red wine, her voice steady, calm. When the glass arrived, she took a sip, her eyes drifting across the room. For a moment they landed on me. I held her gaze, neither inviting nor dismissing. Just a moment, brief and unspoken. Then she looked away, turning her attention back to her drink. I leaned back in my chair, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at my lips. Life had a way of surprising you when you least expected it. I didn't know who she was, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know, but in that moment it didn't matter. What mattered was the reminder that there was life beyond betrayal, beyond heartbreak. I finished my whiskey, setting the glass down with a soft clink. For the first time in weeks, I felt the stirrings of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Hope. Not for reconciliation, not for a return to what had been lost, but for something new. As I stood to leave, I cast one last glance at the woman at the bar. She didn't look up, didn't notice me slipping out into the night. That was fine. This wasn't her story, not yet. This was still mine. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to see where it would take me. I stepped into the cold air, the city lights stretching out before me. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was mine to walk. Whatever came next, I would face it as the man I had become, not the one she had betrayed, but the one who had chosen to move forward. And that, I realized, was enough.
Keep watching our stories by clicking on one of the videos that appear on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to be alerted about new videos. See you next time.